employment rights during maternity. So let's have a look at have a look at this. So early start can be triggered. So what we've got, if an employee is absent from work for a pregnancy-related reason during the last 4 weeks before the week that the baby is due, and this can happen quite regularly. I think a lot of, I know I've done it, where you think you can work right to the very end, but something happens. Like with my last daughter, who's now 20, I keep forgetting she's 20. I was down doing a talk in, I think on the Barnstable or somewhere like that, actually, and Barnstable, and I was down in Barnstable, and I had and I was staying, and luckily I was with my sister, and we'd taken the children, so I was doing a talk down there, and I did my talk, and I had a show. I had 2 talks, one day, one the next, and I had a show, and I was 6 weeks before I was due. Okay, so I had this show, and if anybody knows what a show it is, it's something that happens when the cervix starts to open. It's before you start going into labour. So I had this show. I was like, what the hell? I've got this show. So I had to go to the hospital, and actually the nearest hospital was was I in Cornwall or going to Devon? It doesn't matter anyway, but it's 60 miles away. So I had to get there. I just got a taxi, or I got an ambulance there. Went to the hospital. They said, we're going to have to keep you in. You could go into labour. I had no pain, no movement, and I'd had a few babies, so I knew what I was looking for. But I'm not a doctor, by the way, every pregnancy is different. And I had the show, and then what I did is I said, look, I'm not staying here for 6 weeks. All my family's in Wales, in North Wales, not South Wales. In North Wales, I'm going home. I've not got any pain. I just think it's movement, and I'm just going to go home. And they said, well, you have to sign yourself out. And I thought, blooming right I am. I legged it to my hotel, said to my sister, pack up the stuff for the kids, we're going home. Drove back. And 6 weeks later, I gave birth. And actually, it was more than 6 weeks. It was overdue in the end. And every day I was having a show. So we planned to work to the end, but circumstances can dictate that we're absolutely shattered, or something like that can happen. So if an employee is absent from work for a pregnancy-related reason during the last 4 weeks before the week the baby is due, the start of their maternity leave will automatically be triggered, okay? And at that point, any payment of SSP or contractual sick pay must cease and be replaced by their entitlement, if any, to SMP. They can start maternity leave any time in the 11 weeks before the expected week of childbirth. And this means that any benefits they get under the contract should continue, such as a company car or a mobile phone, where it can also be used for personal use. Now, bonuses where they're not specifically linked to an individual as well. So, to a certain thing. So we've got certain bonuses must still be paid. So if you want any questions answering, you want to ask any questions about that, then, we can give you a call on that, because it's bonuses. I need to read what's written down, and pay rises should be factored into pay as well. So that's another thing that you need to consider when it comes to the pregnancy. So, and a lot of those questions we get on the advice line are about that. What about pay rises? What about the bonuses? Do I keep the car? And actually, you know what? A lot of people that tell you they're pregnant, they've already worked out what they think they're entitled to. I know I did that, because we're only human at the end of the day. And we know that money's going to be tight. We know that we haven't got this income coming in. We know that it's pretty, going to be, it's joyful to have a baby, but, you've got to cut your cloth accordingly, because you drop in like a wage, start going back to work, and then you've got childcare. It's like paying a blooming mortgage. It's ridiculous. So, and I have to say, without going off on a tangent here, but I think the government should do more about that. But, that's a story for another day, really. But the fact is that, you're paying all this money out, and it's a tough time. So what usually happens, I know I did, is I've worked out what money I've got coming in. I've written it down. I've looked at what's going in and what's going out. And then what I've done is I've looked at, my work. I've looked at when I'd be thinking I might be coming back to work, and I've calculated it all. And I know your staff do that as well, because they're just human. So when they tell you they're pregnant, you sit them down, they want you to go through what they've already worked out. And one of the questions they will ask you are things like their perks and benefits. They will ask you about the company car. They will ask you about the mobile. So it's really good to have that ready for them and reassure them. And also many pregnant people do not know that they are entitled to their holiday pay and it accruing while they're on maternity. And it's a lovely little bonus as well when people don't realise that they are entitled to it, and then you surprise them with that. So pick out all the brilliant bits and to give that person, because it's a worrying time. Not only is it joyful, but actually it's a worrying time as well. So that's just I just wanted to mention that anyway. So employment maternity related case law, we've got this case with Heinz versus Mighty Limited, and that's a pregnant employee described as very emotional, tearful, awarded over £350,000 actually. The claimant, who was around 7 months pregnant, emailed their manager to say they're really struggling with certain aspects of their role. They explained they had experienced 2 panic attacks that week, had significantly disrupted sleep, and were concerned that they might become seriously ill with work-related stress and anxiety because they were struggling mentally and physically with the workload. There was no specific response was provided to the claimant. Instead, the manager sent an internal email stating that the claimant was very emotional, tearful, and that they were not overworked. There were other instances where the manager failed to communicate with the claimant, who ultimately resigned from their position. They brought claims of constructed unfair dismissal and pregnancy discrimination, and the Employment Tribunal held that there was an obvious and pressing need to complete a risk assessment, but the respondent failed to take any action after they received the claimant's email. The Employment Tribunal found that the manager was stereotyping the claimant and that they were dismissive and belittling, and the claimant was successful in both the discrimination and constructed unfair dismissal claims. Recent news reports confirm that the claimant was ultimately awarded over £350,000 in compensation. And then we've got the case with Messam versus Bradford Management Services. And this is when an HR assistant notified her employer that she was pregnant and that she be taking maternity leave. Her employer started shouting at her and assigned her physically demanding tasks. When she briefly went off sick with a pregnancy-related illness, she was refused sick pay, and later during her maternity period, she was falsely accused by her employer of stealing food from the canteen and was made to attend an investigation meeting. Oh my gosh. When she returned to work, her HR duties were removed. She was first put on a sales team and then assigned housekeeping roles such as cleaning toilets. She resigned in February 2021 and brought claims of unfair dismissal. It's absolutely ridiculous. No, the thing is, if somebody is stealing food in a canteen, I'm asking them why they've got to that point where they are stealing food. I would ask them that, what is the circumstances that have led to that are so sad that somebody might be stealing food. That's the thing that I'm taking from this anyway. So there's another 2 cases for you to go to the platform and have a look at. But employment rights after maternity. We've got the right to return to the same job, okay? So if they return on or before 26 weeks of leave, they must be allowed to return to the same job. So during protection during redundancy for 18 months after the birth. So the right to return to the same job. After that, if it's not available, it can be an alternative on no less favourable terms and conditions. But the circumstances in which they would happen are very rare. If it's redundancy, they should have first refusal to alternative posts as well. But we're going to breastfeeding and expressing milk now. I have to say that when I had Fleur, my last child, that I did breastfeed while I was working. And in fact, I came back to work because the statutory dispute resolution procedure had just come in. And my employer was absolutely fantastic. There was this massive piece of legislation and I needed to deliver it. So I didn't come back to work full time to begin with, but I made the point that I was breastfeeding. Fleur, all my children are breastfed, and it's the hardest thing I've ever had to do actually, but I breastfed my children. And the fact was that with Fleur, they paid for me to take Fleur with me and my mother-in-law and to stay in a hotel, and actually that I could breastfeed in between my talks, and it was fantastic. I know not everybody will get that, but that's what they did for me. They accommodated it because I wasn't coming back to work unless I could breastfeed my child. So here we have the law on breastfeeding and expressing milk. So the Health and Safety Executive guidance recommends providing private facilities for expressing and storing express milk. Now, I spoke to a lady the other day, and I know you may be listening actually, that was speaking about how amazing Sweden is and how fantastic it is for childcare, and affordable, and you can pick any school you want, and the areas where you can breastfeed, they're like a holistic spa or whatever, as opposed to being shoved in a cupboard over here. But Health and Safety Guidance recommends providing private facilities for expressing and storing expressed milk. You don't actually get there's no statutory time off for breastfeeding or expressing. There's not a requirement to provide facilities for it, but Health and Safety Guidance recommends that employers should provide facilities such as a private clean environment other than the toilets for expressing milk, and a fridge also for storing it. It makes sense anyway, that you want to. The fact is, and I keep saying this, that global birth rates are dropping, and we need to focus on this, and we need to think about things that, this is the human race we're talking about, and the reproduction of the human race, and it's choice now. You don't have to have children. We've got a choice now as females that we don't have to do that. But global birth rates are dropping, and we've got to think about accommodating those parents at work, and things. And I think that's something that you're going to see more and more of in the future when it comes to maternity and pregnancy, and more enhanced rights and things. I think we're going to watch that. I love futuristic HR. I love societal HR. And I do absolutely predict in the next 5 years, we'll be talking about benefits, and we'll be talking about accommodations and things that we're going to do. People won't be sort of like put in a cupboard to express milk. And so, although there's no statutory time off, I think that people will be looking at more, nicer environments for people to breastfeed and also express milk. Now, the EHRC code highlights the needs for employers to remember their duty of care, to remove any hazards for breastfeeding employees, and recommends that employers try to accommodate employees who wish to take time off to breastfeed. The risk of sexual discrimination if you refuse, the code gives an example actually of an employer refusing a request from a woman to return from maternity leave part-time to enable her to continue breastfeeding her child who suffers from eczema, as medical advice was that it would benefit the child's medical condition. And actually, one of the benefits is smoothing breast milk onto eczema as well on a child, and it helps heal it. But unless it can be objectively justified, a refusal by her employer of her request is likely to be indirect sexual discrimination. If you're concerned, if you don't know what to do, if you don't know how to accommodate, if you don't know how to reasonably just ring us up, we will help you. We have loads on our platform. Direct sexual discrimination and breastfeeding. Let's talk about that for a second. So under section 13 in brackets 6, in brackets A, of the Equality Act 2010, it is direct sexual discrimination to treat a woman less favourably because she is breastfeeding. And this was amended in January 2024 to expressly include whilst at work. Now, there was actually a case with Mella, I think we just met, versus MFG Academies Trust, harassment related to breastfeeding. It was harassment on the grounds of sex to force the employee to express in the toilets or a car had the effect of creating a degrading or humiliating environment for her. And depending what time of the year it is, it can be quite cold, to sit in your car and breastfeed a child there as well. So, I will become quite passionate about this, by the way. It's just because I've seen and heard so many things about it. And it's very, very simple to accommodate, to make people feel wanted, and, to implement those risk assessments as far as I'm concerned.